First time hurts. The virgin giant mail order. Virgin cried, but rich lonely cowboy promised, "I'll make LT hurt sweetly, so you won't feel it and ask for more." Wyoming Territory, 1883. The barn, wedding night. The virgin giant lay trembling in the hay-strewn barn loft, her cream chemise glowing in the golden lamplight as tears streamed down Magnolia Thornfield's face. Her first time was happening right now, not in a proper marriage bed, but here in the intimate darkness where her rich, lonely cowboy husband had carried her, away from prying eyes and judgmental whispers. The first time hurts, every woman had warned her. It tears, it bleeds. Virgin brides cry through their wedding nights while husbands take what marriage grants them. At 6 feet 3 inches tall, this mail-order virgin had traveled 800 miles to marry a man she'd never met, a cattle baron barely 5'8" who now hovered above her trembling body. But Silas Brennan had made an impossible promise when she'd confessed her terror. "I'll make it hurt sweetly, so you won't feel it, and ask for more." Now, as the rich, lonely cowboy positioned himself over his virgin giant bride in the hay, his muscled frame illuminated by flickering lantern light, Magnolia couldn't stop crying. The first time hurts. The virgin giant knew this truth in her bones. She'd seen the pitying looks from town women, heard their whispers that a man his size could never properly handle a mail-order bride as big as her. The lonely cowboy rancher possessed everything: 3,000 acres, prize cattle, wealth beyond measure. But could he truly keep his wedding night promise? Could any man make a virgin's first time hurt sweetly instead of agonizingly? "Please," the virgin giant whispered, her hands clutching his open shirt as fresh tears fell. "Everyone says the first time hurts so badly. What if I'm too big for this? What if I break you? What if my body won't?" The rich, lonely cowboy silenced her with his mouth, his weathered hands cradling her face with devastating gentleness. This self-made rancher who'd conquered the Wyoming frontier now faced his greatest test, proving to his virgin mail-order bride that her first time in this hay-strewn sanctuary could be beautiful instead of brutal. "Magnolia," Silas breathed against her lips, his storm-gray eyes burning into hers. "I brought you here because this is where I'm most myself. Where I gentle wild horses and birth new calves. Where I know patience." His hand slid down her trembling body. "Your first time will hurt sweetly, so tenderly you'll barely feel the pain beneath the pleasure. And when we walk back to that house at sunrise, you won't be a terrified virgin anymore. You'll be a woman asking for more." But 3 days earlier, when Magnolia Thornfield first stepped off that train in Redemption Bluff, she'd been certain this marriage would end before it began. The Wyoming sun had beaten down mercilessly on the train platform as she emerged from the passenger car, her worn carpetbag clutched in white-knuckled hands. At 6 feet 3 inches, she towered over every soul on that platform like a lodgepole pine among sagebrush. Her shoulders hunched automatically, a lifetime habit of trying to appear smaller. Less wrong, less offensive to the world that had never made space for someone like her. She'd memorized Silas Brennan's description from his letters: 5'8", brown hair, gray eyes, scar on his left jaw from a longhorn's temper. But when her gaze landed on the man holding a hand-lettered sign reading Miss Thornfield, her heart plummeted straight through the platform boards. He was small, not just shorter than her. Every man was shorter than her, but genuinely compact. Lean as whipcord, no bigger than her father had been. And the way he stared up at her, frozen mid-step with his mouth slightly open, told Magnolia everything she needed to know. "Mr. Brennan?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper, thick with unshed tears. "I understand if you've changed your mind. I can take the next train back to Missouri. I have enough money for—" "Changed my mind." His voice, rough as creek gravel, cut through her spiral of shame. He moved closer, and she noticed his eyes, storm gray and steady, traveling up, up, up her frame, not with disgust, but with something she couldn't name. Wonder, maybe. Miss Thornfield, I'm just trying to figure out how a woman as magnificent as you ended up answering an advertisement from a man like me. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over. No one had ever called her magnificent. Freakish, yes. Unnatural, certainly. A cautionary tale mothers whispered to daughters about what happened when God got the measurements wrong. But magnificent? I'm too tall, she choked out, hating the weakness in her voice, but unable to stop the words. I'm built like a man. I eat more than any woman ought to. I can't wear ready-made dresses. The seamstress in town charged me double because she said I required twice the fabric of a normal woman. I've scared away every decent man in 3 counties because they don't want a wife who makes them feel small when she stands beside them. And I probably should have told you all this before you paid for my passage, but I was desperate, and my father's farm failed, and the debts were piling up, and I thought maybe in the West, where everything is bigger, I wouldn't be such a... Stop. The word wasn't harsh, but it silenced her immediately. Silas stepped even closer, close enough that she could see the scar he'd mentioned, a white line tracing his jaw like lightning frozen in flesh. Miss Thornfield, Magnolia, may I speak plainly? She nodded, unable to trust her voice. I spent 15 years breaking my back to build something that matters. Sunrise to sunset, 7 days a week, until my hands bled and my bones ached. I've got 3,000 acres now. Prize stock. Enough money to live comfortable for the rest of my days. He paused, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. But you know what I realized last winter, sitting alone in a house big enough for 10 people, eating supper at a table that could seat 20. She shook her head. All of it means precisely nothing without someone to share it with. I didn't advertise for a wife because I needed someone small and delicate to make me feel like a big man. I advertised because I needed someone real, someone who's lived through hard things and come out stronger. Someone who knows what it's like to be measured by the wrong ruler. His thumb brushed away her tears with shocking gentleness. I'm not looking for perfect, Magnolia. I'm looking for true. And standing here right now, looking at you, I think I found it. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet. In 24 years, no man had ever looked at her the way Silas Brennan was looking at her now, like she was something precious instead of problematic, something chosen instead of settled for. But I'm so much bigger than you, she whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted her since she'd first read his description. People will talk. They'll say that I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming territory. That I somehow convinced a woman who could have any man she wanted to take a chance on a stubborn rancher who's too short and too old and too set in his ways. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Let them talk, Magnolia. Let them say whatever they want. The only opinions that matter in a marriage are the 2 people in it. Magnolia stared at this man, this stranger who was supposed to be her husband, and felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight since the first time a boy had called her a giant freak at age 12, since the first time a suitor had proposed as a cruel joke in front of half the county, since the first time she'd realized that her body, her height, her very existence would always be the first thing people saw and the only thing they remembered. Now then, Silas said, his tone shifting to something more practical, even as warmth lingered in his eyes. I've got a wagon ready, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, has supper waiting. We'll get you settled, let you rest from your journey, and we can talk about the wedding whenever you're ready. No pressure, no rush. You're safe here, Magnolia. I give you my word on that. As he reached for her carpet bag, their hands brushed, and Magnolia felt the calluses on his palms, evidence of every promise he'd just made about hard work and perseverance. These were hands that had built an empire from nothing, hands that had just wiped away her tears with unexpected tenderness. Maybe, just maybe, these were hands that could be trusted. The Brennan Ranch sprawled across the valley like a promise made solid, white-painted fences stretching toward horizons that seemed to have no end, a two-story house with a wraparound porch that caught the afternoon light, barns that looked newer and sturdier than anything Magnolia had ever seen back in Missouri. She couldn't stop staring as the wagon crested the final hill. She'd expected a simple homestead, maybe a cabin with a lean-to for the animals. But this was an empire. "It's too much," she whispered, more to herself than to Silas. "It's yours now," he replied simply, his hands steady on the reins. "Or it will be, once we're married. Everything I have becomes ours, Magnolia. I meant what I said back at the station. I don't need a wife to cook my meals and mend my shirts. Mrs. Chen handles the house just fine. I need a partner. Someone to build the next 15 years with." The word partner settled into her bones like warmth after years of cold. No one had ever called her that before. Burden, yes. Obligation, certainly. But partner? They pulled into the yard just as a man emerged from the nearest barn, tall, broad-shouldered, everything a Western rancher was supposed to look like. His eyes traveled over Magnolia with unconcealed skepticism, lingering on her height, her broad shoulders, the way she had to duck slightly, even sitting in the wagon. "Boss?" The man nodded to Silas, then jerked his chin toward Magnolia with an expression that made her stomach twist. "This the mail-order bride?" "This is Miss Magnolia Thornfield," Silas said, his voice cooling several degrees. "Soon to be Mrs. Brennan. Magnolia, this is Cole Masterson, my foreman." "Ma'am." Masterson touched his hat brim, but his expression remained doubtful. He looked at Silas with something between concern and pity. "Boss, can I have a word?" Silas's jaw tightened in a way Magnolia was learning to recognize. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of Miss Thornfield." "Fine." Masterson crossed his arms over his chest, and Magnolia felt herself shrinking inward even though she was still sitting down. "The boys are already talking. You know how ranch hands are. They see a woman bigger than their boss. They start wondering who's really running things around here. And when we go to the Cattlemen's Association meeting next month, when the other ranchers see, that's enough." Silas's voice cracked like a whip, sharp and cold, in a way Magnolia hadn't heard from him before. It made her jump. "Miss Thornfield's size is none of your concern, none of the hands' concern, and sure as hell none of the association's concern. She's going to be my wife, which makes her the lady of this ranch. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and ride out today. Is that clear?" Masterson held up his hands in a placating gesture, but his eyes held something harder. "I'm just saying what others will say, boss. You worked too hard building this place to what? To finally have something worth working for." Silas climbed down from the wagon with controlled movements, each one tight with barely restrained anger. "To have a reason to come home at night instead of just collapsing in an empty bed. To have someone who gives a damn whether I live or die." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Masterson's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe understanding, definitely discomfort. Silas moved to Magnolia's side of the wagon and offered his hand to help her down. She hesitated, frozen by the scene unfolding before her. She'd seen this play out 100 times in Missouri, men expressing concern, offering advice, ultimately convincing the suitor that she wasn't worth the trouble, the mockery, the social cost. "Magnolia," Silas said quietly, his hands still extended, his gray eyes looking up at her with steady patience. "Take my hand." She did. And the moment her boots hit the ground, she towered over both men by several inches. Masterson's expression flickered again, that look she knew so well. Pity mixed with contempt. Poor Silas Brennan, it said. Successful in everything except choosing a woman who wouldn't make him look ridiculous. Mr. Masterson, Magnolia heard herself say, her voice stronger than she felt. I understand your concern. Truly I do. I've heard variations of it my entire life. But I didn't travel 800 miles to cause Mr. Brennan trouble or embarrassment. If he decides, her voice caught, but she pushed through. If he decides this arrangement isn't suitable after all, I'll go quietly. I won't make a fuss. I won't ask for anything. I'll just go. Like hell you will. Silas's hand found the small of her back, warm and grounding through the fabric of her traveling dress. The touch was possessive in a way that made her pulse quicken. Magnolia, you're not going anywhere. And Cole, if the boys have concerns, they can bring them to me directly. But I'll tell them the same thing I'm telling you right now. I've spent years watching men twice my size fail at this life because they were too stupid or too proud to think before they acted. Size doesn't measure worth. It doesn't measure strength. It doesn't measure character. And it sure as hell doesn't measure love. That last word, love, hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Masterson's eyebrows shot up. Magnolia's breath caught in her throat. Now, Silas continued, his voice softening but losing none of its steel, I'm going to show my future wife to her room so she can rest from her journey and wash the train dust off. We'll discuss ranch business tomorrow, Cole. And if you're still employed here tomorrow, we'll never have this conversation again. Understood? Masterson stared at them for a long moment, at Silas's protective stance, at Magnolia's height, at the impossible picture they made together. Then he nodded slowly. Understood, boss. Miss Thornfield, welcome to Brennan Ranch. But as Silas guided Magnolia toward the house, she glanced back and saw Masterson shaking his head, his expression certain. Certain this wouldn't work. Certain she would fail. Certain that love, if that's what Silas had meant, couldn't overcome the simple mathematics of their bodies. She'd seen that look before on every man who'd ever courted her out of obligation or curiosity. On her father's face when another suitor had walked away. On the preacher's wife when she'd asked about marriage prospects and received only pitying silence. The question that haunted her as they climbed the porch steps wasn't whether the town would accept them. It was whether Silas's eyes would eventually hold that same certainty, that same regret at having chosen wrong. Inside, the house smelled like beeswax and bread, clean and welcoming in a way Magnolia hadn't experienced since her mother died. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen, a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression that softened when she saw Magnolia. Miss Thornfield, she said, in accented but clear English. Your room is ready. Hot water for washing. Clean towels. Supper in 1 hour. Thank you, Magnolia managed, overwhelmed by the kindness in the woman's face. Silas led her upstairs to a bedroom that was larger than the entire cabin she'd shared with her father. A real bed with a quilted coverlet. A washstand with a porcelain basin. A window that looked out over the valley, golden in the late afternoon sun. And on the bed, laid out carefully, a fresh nightgown in plain white cotton, clearly made for someone of normal size, which meant it would be too short for her by several inches. Mrs. Chen didn't know your measurements, Silas said, noticing where her gaze had landed. But she's a fine seamstress. She'll make you proper things once you're settled. Magnolia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Proper things. As if she could ever be proper at this height, with these shoulders, with this body that had never fit anywhere it was supposed to. Magnolia, Silas's voice was gentle. Look at me. She did, and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I know what you're thinking, he said quietly. I know what that scene with Cole did to you. I can see it in your face. You're waiting for me to realize I made a mistake. You're expecting me to change my mind. Haven't you?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "Now that you've seen me standing next to your foreman, next to a normal-sized man, haven't you realized how ridiculous we'll look together? How people will laugh?" He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. "You want to know what I realized when I saw you standing there?" She nodded, bracing for the blow. "That I was right about you. That you're exactly what I hoped for." His hand reached up, to cup her cheek, and his touch was warm and calloused and impossibly gentle. "Magnolia, I've spent my whole life being underestimated, being told I'm too small to run a ranch this size, too short to command respect, not man enough to succeed in a territory where size seems to be all that matters. And you know what I learned?" "What?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "That the people who measure worth by inches are the same people who'll never build anything that lasts. They're too busy trying to look big to actually be great." His thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "I don't need a wife who makes me look bigger. I need a wife who makes me want to be better. And when I look at you, when I see your strength, your courage, your heart, that's exactly what I see. Someone who makes me want to be worthy of her." Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but this time they felt different. Less like shame and more like something breaking open inside her chest, something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Now," Silas said, his voice returning to that practical warmth she was learning to recognize, "you wash up and rest. Mrs. Chen will have supper ready soon, and afterward, if you're not too tired, I'll show you the horses. I've got a mare I think you'll like, big Percheron named Goliath. Everyone said she was too big to be useful, too clumsy to work. But she's the gentlest soul I've ever known, and strong enough to pull a loaded wagon through mud that would stop an ox team." He paused at the doorway, looking back at her with a half-smile that made her heart stutter. "Sometimes the biggest hearts come in the biggest bodies, Magnolia. I learned that from a horse. I'm hoping you'll teach me even more." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by comfort she didn't deserve and kindness she couldn't understand. But as she poured water into the basin and began washing away the train dust, Magnolia let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to be worthy of the way Silas Brennan looked at her. What it might feel like to finally be enough. For 3 days, Silas Brennan courted his future wife like a man gentling a wild mustang, with patience, distance, and an uncanny ability to read her fear before she could name it herself. He didn't push, didn't demand, didn't even mention the wedding that everyone in town expected to happen immediately. Ranch hands married their mail-order brides within hours of meeting them, consummating the union before the sun set to make it legal and binding. But Silas acted like they had all the time in the world. On the first morning, he found Magnolia on the porch at sunrise, unable to sleep in a bed too comfortable, in a house too quiet, in a life too good to possibly be real. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Not too close, always respectful of her space. "It's too soft," she admitted. "The bed. I'm used to a corn husk mattress that poked through the ticking. This feels like sleeping on a cloud, and I keep thinking I'll wake up and find out none of this is real." "It's real," he said simply. "And if the bed's too soft, we'll get you a firmer mattress. Everything here can be changed to suit you, Magnolia. This is your home now." Then he'd stood, offered his hand, and said, "Come on, I want to show you something before the day gets hot." He'd taken her to the valley at sunrise, when golden light flooded across 3,000 acres of his empire. The grass rippled like water in the morning breeze. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and the mountains rose in the background like sentinels guarding something precious. "This is what 15 years looks like," Silas said quietly. his voice carrying a weight she was learning to recognize. The weight of sacrifice, of loneliness, of purpose without partnership. Every fence post, every head of cattle, every acre. I built it all thinking that success would fill the emptiness. But standing here now, showing it to you, this is the first time it's ever felt like something worth having. Magnolia had no words for the way his confession settled into her chest, warm and terrifying. Then he'd introduced her to the horses. 6 magnificent animals he'd trained himself, each one responding to his voice with trust that spoke of patient hours and gentle hands. But it was the last stall that made Magnolia's breath catch. A massive Percheron mare stood inside, gray-dappled, easily 17 hands high, with hooves the size of dinner plates and shoulders that could pull a house off its foundation. "This is Goliath," Silas said, and Magnolia heard the affection in his voice. Everyone said she was too big to be useful, too clumsy to work, too much horse for any reasonable purpose. But you know what I saw? "What?" Magnolia whispered, unable to look away from the magnificent creature. "The gentlest soul I'd ever met, trapped in a body that scared people." He opened the stall door, and Goliath immediately lowered her massive head, nuzzling his shoulder with surprising delicacy. "So I bought her, trained her myself, and now she's the most valuable animal on this ranch, strong enough to pull loaded wagons through mud that stops ox teams, gentle enough to let children braid flowers in her mane." Then Silas had looked at Magnolia with meaning so heavy she could barely breathe. "Sometimes the biggest hearts come in the biggest bodies," he'd said. "And the people who can't see that, they're the ones missing out." Goliath had turned her large liquid eyes on Magnolia then, and stepped forward with surprising grace. The mare nuzzled Magnolia's shoulder exactly as she'd done to Silas, a gesture of recognition, of kinship, of understanding that transcended species. And Magnolia had broken down crying right there in the barn, with this gentle giant horse pressing against her and Silas's hand steady on her back, letting her weep out 24 years of being too much, too big, too wrong for the world she'd been born into. On the second day, Silas had taken her to town, a test, though he pretended it wasn't. Redemption Bluff's main street fell silent when they walked down the boardwalk together. Women whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes traveling up Magnolia's frame with undisguised shock. Men stared openly, comparing Silas's compact build to Magnolia's towering height with expressions that ranged from amusement to pity to outright contempt. One drunk cowboy leaning against the saloon door had called out loud enough for half the street to hear, "Hey, Brennan, who wears the pants in your household? Or does she just pick you up and carry you around like a baby?" Laughter erupted from the saloon. Magnolia's face burned with shame, so intense she thought she might be sick right there on the boardwalk. But Silas simply steered her into the general store, his hand steady at her elbow, his expression unchanged. Inside, he'd ordered fabric for new dresses, enough for 6, in colors she'd never dared wear. When the shopkeeper quoted a price that was clearly inflated, clearly taking advantage, Silas had simply laid the money on the counter and said, "My wife deserves quality, and if you try to cheat me again, I'll take my considerable business to the store in Laramie." My wife. He'd said it like it was already true, like the mockery outside meant nothing, like her worth was established fact rather than generous fiction. That evening, after supper, she'd found him on the porch again, staring at the stars. "I'm sorry," she'd said, settling into the chair beside him, "for what happened in town, for embarrassing you. You didn't embarrass me." His voice held an edge she hadn't heard before, not anger at her, but something colder, directed outward. "Those fools embarrassed themselves. Small minds always do." "But they were right," she'd whispered. "I do make you look like the luckiest man in Wyoming territory." He'd turned in his chair to face her fully. Like I somehow convinced a woman who could have anyone to take a chance on a stubborn rancher who's too short and too old and too set in his ways. Stop saying that, she'd protested. You're not, and you're not whatever cruel thing you're thinking about yourself right now. His gray eyes had held hers with unwavering intensity. Magnolia, I need you to understand something. Those people in town, their opinions don't mean a damn thing to me. I didn't build this ranch to impress them. I didn't send for a wife to meet their approval. I did it because I was tired of being alone, because I wanted a partner. And when I read your letter, the one where you described yourself as unfortunately tall and regrettably strong, I knew I'd found someone who understood what it's like to be measured by the wrong ruler your whole life. He'd reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his, so small compared to hers, but strong and warm and certain. People will always see us and make assumptions, he'd continued. They'll always wonder. They'll always gossip. But here's what I know, Magnolia. I know you're kind, because you've been gentle with every animal on this ranch. I know you're intelligent, because you've asked thoughtful questions about everything from cattle rotation to water rights to why I chose this valley for the house. I know you're strong, not just in body, but in spirit. Because you're still standing after a lifetime of being told you're wrong just for existing. And I know that I'd be honored, truly honored, to call you my wife if you'll have me. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. A coyote called from distant hills. And Magnolia had felt something inside her chest crack open, not breaking but blooming, like a seed that had waited years in frozen ground, finally feeling the warmth of spring sun. Saturday, she'd whispered, the decision forming even as she spoke it. Let's get married on Saturday. The smile that broke across his face could have lit the darkness. Saturday it is. On the third day, Friday, Magnolia had helped Mrs. Chen with chores, learning the rhythms of the house while Silas worked with the cattle. But in the afternoon, as she hung laundry on the line behind the house, she'd overheard voices from the barn. Boss, I'm telling you this as a friend. It was Cole Masterson's voice, lower than usual, but still carrying. You're making a mistake. That woman, she's going to break you. Maybe not physically, though God knows that's possible too. But socially. The association meeting is in 3 weeks. Every major rancher in the territory will be there. And when they see her, what? Silas's voice was dangerously quiet. They'll laugh, Silas. They'll make jokes. And worse, they'll start wondering if you're strong enough to run an operation this size if you can't even control your own wife. Control. The word cracked like a gunshot. Is that what you think marriage is about? Control. I think marriage is about partnership between equals, Masterson said, and Magnolia could hear the careful reasoning in his tone. And I'm sorry, but you two aren't equals. She's... Finish that sentence, Silas interrupted, his voice cold as January wind. Go ahead, Cole. Tell me what she is. Silence. Then, I'm trying to protect you, boss. I've worked for you for 10 years. I've watched you build this place from nothing, and I don't want to see you throw it all away because you were lonely and made a desperate choice. More silence. Magnolia stood frozen behind the laundry line, a wet sheet clutched in her trembling hands, waiting for Silas to agree. To admit that yes, she was a desperate choice, a mistake made in loneliness that would cost him everything he'd worked for. Get out, Silas said quietly. Boss, get out of my barn, off my ranch, and don't come back. You're fired. Magnolia gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. You're firing me? Masterson's voice rose in disbelief. After 10 years, because I told you the truth? No, I'm firing you because after 10 years, you still don't understand the first damn thing about strength. Footsteps moved across the barn floor, Silas's, purposeful and angry. Real strength isn't about size, Cole. It's not about controlling people, or impressing the association, or maintaining some image of what a man should be. Real strength is having the courage to choose love over approval, to choose partnership over pride, to choose truth over what's easy. Love? Masterson's voice held open skepticism. Boss, you've known her 3 days. I've known her long enough to recognize something I thought I'd never find. Someone who sees me. Not my ranch, not my money, not what I've built, but me. The man who's too short and too stubborn and too damn lonely to pretend anymore that success means anything without someone to share it with. Silas's voice dropped, but lost none of its intensity. And I've known her long enough to see that she's everything I didn't know I needed. So yes, Cole. Love. And if you can't respect that, then you don't belong on this ranch. Magnolia heard the barn door slam, heard Masterson's boots on the hard-packed dirt, heard him mount his horse and ride away without another word. And she stood there behind the laundry line, tears streaming down her face, clutching a wet sheet to her chest, and realized that Silas Brennan had just sacrificed his foreman of 10 years, a man he trusted, a man who knew every aspect of the ranch operation, for her. For her. That evening, she'd found him in the barn, brushing down Goliath with long, steady strokes. He looked tired, older than his 38 years. And when he saw her in the doorway, something vulnerable flickered across his face before he could hide it. I heard, she said quietly. About Cole. He nodded, returning his attention to the horse. Ranch hands talk. I figured word would spread. You didn't have to fire him, not for me. I didn't fire him for you. Silas set down the brush and turned to face her fully. I fired him for me. Because I'm tired, Magnolia. I'm tired of people who think strength means dominance. Tired of measuring success by what other people think. Tired of living for approval from men whose opinions I don't even respect. He crossed the barn toward her, and even in the dim light, his eyes burned with intensity. I've spent 15 years building an empire I had no one to share with. And now I finally have that chance. I'll be damned if I let small-minded gossip steal it from me. But the association meeting, to hell with the association. He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him. If they can't handle seeing a successful rancher with a magnificent wife, that's their problem, not mine. Magnificent. He kept using that word, like he actually meant it. Tomorrow, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. We get married. Tomorrow, he agreed. And tomorrow night. He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air between them. Tomorrow night, they would be expected to consummate the marriage, to share a bed, to... Terror must have shown on her face, because Silas closed the remaining distance between them and took her hands in his. Tomorrow night, he said gently. We'll figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just you and me, taking whatever time we need. I meant what I said, Magnolia. I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to rush you. But as she climbed the stairs to her room that night, Magnolia's hands shook. Because tomorrow night wasn't about pressure or expectations or Silas's kindness. Tomorrow night was about biology, about the brutal mathematics of their bodies, about the stories every woman had whispered to her, stories of pain and blood and tears, of husbands who took what marriage granted them regardless of their wives' fear. The first time hurts. Everyone said so. And Magnolia was 6 feet 3 inches of virgin terror, wondering how she would survive what was coming. The Redemption Bluff Church was packed on Saturday afternoon, not with well-wishers, but with curiosity seekers who'd come to witness the spectacle of the giant woman marrying the small rancher. Magnolia heard their whispers through the thin walls of the back room as Mrs. Chen fastened the buttons on her wedding dress. Poor man. Won't last a year. Imagine the wedding night. Each whisper drove shame deeper into her chest until she could barely breathe. When Silas appeared in the doorway, improper, she knew, but she'd never been so grateful to see anyone. He took one look at her face and ordered everyone out. The moment they were alone, Magnolia broke. They're laughing at you, at us. I can't do this to you. You've worked too hard, sacrificed too much. Come here, he said quietly. When she didn't move, he crossed to her, taking both her trembling hands in his. I'm about to marry the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. A woman who survived things that would have broken lesser people. A woman who makes me want to be better than I am. But what they're saying doesn't matter, won't ever matter. His calloused palm cupped her face with devastating gentleness. The only opinions that count in a marriage are the two people in it. I'm scared, she whispered. Of tonight, of disappointing you, of the pain everyone says comes with. Understanding flickered in his gray eyes. The wedding night. She nodded miserably. I don't know how to do this, and everyone says the first time hurts so badly. What if I'm too big? What if I hurt you? What if… Magnolia. He waited until she met his eyes. I spent 15 years training horses. The wildest, most skittish animal can become the most loyal partner if you take time to earn their trust, if you move slow, if you listen. His thumb brushed away her tears. I'm not going to hurt you. When it happens, it'll be because you're ready, because you want it, because you trust me. What if I'm never ready? Then we'll have the best damn unconsummated marriage in Wyoming territory. He said it with such conviction she almost laughed through her tears. Everything else? We'll figure it out together. The ceremony passed in a blur. The reception was brief, just cake and punch at the church hall, with townspeople watching their every move like wolves waiting for weakness. But finally, mercifully, they were home. Alone. The ranch house felt enormous in the silence. Mrs. Chen had tactfully retired to her cottage, leaving the newlyweds to navigate the terror of what came next. Magnolia stood in the parlor, her wedding dress suddenly too tight, her lungs forgetting how to pull air. I should change, she stammered, backing toward the stairs. Mrs. Chen prepared the bedroom, and I don't want to wrinkle. Magnolia. Silas caught her hand gently. Breathe. She tried. Failed. Her heart hammered so violently she thought her ribs might crack. I don't know what to do. No one explained. My mother died before she could tell me, and I've heard stories, but they all say it hurts, and there's blood, and I'm so big. What if I hurt you? What if… Easy now. He guided her to the settee, sitting beside her without crowding. How about we just talk first? No expectations, just you and me. But we're married now. You have rights. You can… The only right I have is to treat you with respect. His jaw tightened. Everything else is a gift you choose to give, not something I'm entitled to take. Do you trust me? She considered seriously. 3 days ago, he was a stranger. Now? Yes. Then trust me when I say we're not doing anything unless you want to. And if you do want to, we'll go as slow as you need. The moment you want to stop, we stop. Your comfort matters more than anything else. But don't you need… What I need, he interrupted gently, is for my wife to feel safe with me. The knot in her chest loosened. The stories make it sound awful, like something men do to women, not with them. Then those men are damned fools. He shifted to face her. Can I tell you what I hope for? Not expect, but hope. She nodded. I hope that tonight, or next week, or next month, you'll trust me enough to let me show you it doesn't have to be awful. That done right With patience, it can be beautiful. Something that brings pleasure, not just pain. His voice dropped, intimate. I hope to learn every inch of you. What you like, what makes you sigh. I hope to make you feel cherished in ways you've never felt. Heat bloomed across her cheeks. No one had ever talked to her like this, frankly but reverently. And the pain, she whispered. It can hurt, he acknowledged honestly. But not badly. Not if we take our time. Not if we make sure you're ready, truly ready. He met her eyes with absolute sincerity. Magnolia, I promise you this. If you choose to be with me tonight, I'll make it hurt sweetly. So gently, you'll barely feel it. And afterward, you won't be afraid. You'll ask for more. His confidence sent shivers down her spine. Not fear, but something else entirely. How can you promise that? Because I've spent my life learning patience, learning to read what someone needs before they ask. And because I've waited 38 years to find someone worth cherishing, I'm not about to rush it now. She sat with his words, feeling them settle into her bones. She thought about his gentleness with Goliath, his defense of her to Masterson, to the town. 3 days of respect and genuine interest in who she was. Okay, she whispered. I want to try. Tonight, I want you to show me. The smile that broke across his face was tender and triumphant. Then let's not go to the bedroom, Mrs. Brennan. Let me take you somewhere I feel most myself. Somewhere I know patience. He led her to the barn, the same barn where he'd introduced her to Goliath, where he'd fired Masterson for her, where everything that mattered had happened. The loft above glowed with lamplight he'd prepared earlier. Fresh hay covered the floor, soft blankets spread across it. The smell of horses and leather and summer grass filled the air. This is where I gentle wild things, he said quietly. Where I learned everything I know about patience, about earning trust. He cupped her face. This is where I want to gentle you, Magnolia. Where I want to prove that some promises are made to be kept. Now here, in this golden lamplight, with her virgin body trembling beneath her wedding dress and his gray eyes burning into hers, Magnolia Thornfield Brennan stood at the edge of everything she'd feared her entire life. I'm terrified, she breathed. I know. He began unbuttoning her dress, slowly, giving her time to adjust. When it finally loosened, he draped his coat around her shoulders, protecting her modesty even here. But here's what's going to happen. I'm going to kiss you until you stop shaking, until you're relaxed enough to feel what I'm doing instead of anticipating pain. That might take 5 minutes, or 50. We've got all night. And then I'm going to touch you, over your chemise first, and find all the places that make you sigh. I'm going to learn your body like a new language. His hand cupped her face. And I won't move to the next step until you're begging me to. The word, begging, sent unexpected heat through her. True to his word, he started with kisses, soft, exploring, patient. His lips traced her mouth, her jaw, the spot below her ear that made her gasp. When his hands began wandering, they moved over fabric first, learning her shape through cotton and linen. Time became fluid. Minutes or hours passed as he systematically dismantled her fear, replacing it with sensation she'd never imagined. When he finally asked permission to remove her chemise, she granted it without hesitation. When his hands and mouth mapped her bare skin, she arched into the touch. You're so beautiful, he murmured against her collarbone. Every magnificent inch. And somehow, sprawled in the hay with lamplight painting them gold, she believed him. When he finally asked, his voice rough with restraint, Are you ready for me? She was shocked to realize she was. More than ready. Aching for something she couldn't name. Yes, she breathed. Please, Silas. I need... He positioned himself carefully, entering slow, so slow, watching her face. There was pressure, a sharp pinch that made her wince. But he stopped immediately, his hand finding the place that made stars burst behind her eyelids, distracting her until her body adjusted, accommodated, welcomed. "Breathe," he coached. "The worst is over, I promise." And he was right. As he moved, achingly gentle, painfully patient, the discomfort faded, replaced by something else. Something that built and built until she clutched his shoulders and gasped his name, and discovered that bodies could speak languages words never could. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? We love hearing from our viewers. And if you're enjoying Magnolia and Silas's story, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next heartwarming tale. Afterward, tangled in blankets with hay in her hair and lamplight flickering shadows across the barn walls, Silas traced patterns on her shoulder. "How do you feel?" Magnolia considered seriously. Her body ached in unfamiliar places. But the fear was gone, burned away by tenderness and patience and intimacy she'd never imagined possible. "Safe," she whispered. "Cherished, and—" Her cheeks heated, wondering when we might do that again. His laugh rumbled through his chest, warm and delighted. "Mrs. Brennan, I did promise you'd ask for more. How about tomorrow morning?" She pressed a kiss to his scarred jaw, smiling. Tomorrow morning sounds perfect. And it was. Because sometimes the first time does hurt, but in the right hands, with the right heart, with the right man who sees magnificence where others see problems, that hurt becomes sweetly bearable, becomes the beginning of something beautiful, becomes proof that love isn't measured in inches, but in patience, in promises kept, in the courage to choose partnership over pride. Magnolia Thornfield had spent 24 years being too much for everyone. But in Silas Brennan's arms, in a hay-strewn barn under Wyoming stars, she discovered she was finally, perfectly, magnificently enough. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that they're enough exactly as they are. And drop a comment telling us what you loved most about Silas and Magnolia's journey. Until next time, remember, the best love stories are the ones that prove some hurts can be made sweet.